Welcome back to the YWAM Nashville podcast. This is Nolan from the media team. Youth of the Mission Nashville is a missional community that's been reaching the Nashville area for over 30 years. We're dedicated to spreading the name of Jesus to countless nations by training missionaries to go from Nashville to the nations. This winter, we're running a Discipleship Bible School, a 3-month school deep dive into the scriptures chronologically to understand God's redemptive story. This series is designed to give you a taste of what DBS lectures are like here at YWAM Nashville. This week's episode is Mae Chrisman, a DBS and SBS speaker on the Pentateuch. She spoke this week all about God's holiness displayed in the Old Testament. Let's jump in.
Yeah, my name's Mae. This is my second time teaching on a DBS. I've been in SBS for years. And so I do a lot of SBS watching, but DBS is new. I've done a few DTS, a few DBS. But I was telling Graham last night that when I taught on DBS the first time, I just fell in love with this school. Like, I think this is such an incredible school. Like, especially the way that you guys get to read the word together in community, and that you just focus so much on God's character and God's redemptive plan, and just dig into that and get to see the entire context condensed in 3 months. It's so beautiful and so much fun. So I'm really excited for you. Have you guys read the Bible before? Is your first time going through the whole thing? You read it?
Definitely the first time doing it in one sitting.
Yeah.
I think, because I've been a Christian my whole life, and so I think in my lifespan, I'd probably read it all.
Yeah.
But not to see the whole story all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't.
Yeah.
The first time.
Fresh and new. Exciting. It's exciting every time you go through it, so we're all on the same page there. I did bring some pictures. This is my husband, Zach. He's awesome. He's perfect. We met on SBS. We were students together. And then we both stayed on and staffed for 4 years and then just got married in 2023. What?
The
dog, though.
I know, this is my family's dog. He's up in Canada. His name is Fozzie. He's so cute. I love him with all my heart. This is my family. My parents here. And then this is my sister. And this is my brother and his girlfriend, my sister's fiance, and then my husband, Zach. And then this is Zach's family. We both did photo shoots on the same beach with the same photographer this summer, so really fun to have these family pictures. We have the same sibling order, same gender, same age gap, everything, which is kind of fun.
Wow.
So this is his older sister and her family, and his other older sister and her husband. Her husband's from Australia, or not Australia, New Zealand, which is fun, so we relate a lot there. And this is my favorite of our wedding pictures. We got married in the mountains of Canada, in Alberta.
Wow.
And it was awesome. It was so awesome.
Fancy.
So, yeah, there's some photos. Okay. The Pentateuch. I'm so excited to teach. Like, out of the Bible, the Pentateuch and I think the late prophets are like my favorite areas of the Bible. But I just love the first 5 books. They are so insanely foundational. Like, one of my really good friends, and she's like the most wise Bible person I've ever known. But she teaches on the DTS every year. And she teaches the week character and nature of God. And all she does for that week is teach through the Pentateuch and talk about the character and nature of God in the Pentateuch. It's so fascinating because she just like unpacks just like every character of God's in the like that's literally why these books were written, was to show the foundational characteristics of God.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so they're just mind-blowing. And I think without these 5 books, like I said, they're literally written to be the foundation of their faith, of the Israelites' faith. And this is still our history too. Like, this is the foundation of our faith too. We need these books. They are so cool. Like, even the tough part, like, I understand God's grace in potentially the most powerful way I've ever understood it, by reading the curses. Like, every part of these books is so beautiful and so cool. So I'm excited to talk about that. It's fun. So many new things to learn. It's real. Sometimes I forget that these things actually happened, and I have to remind myself that, like, when we're studying the Bible and reading the Bible, we're reading history. And I really got reminded of that when I was teaching Exodus a few weeks ago, like getting to study ancient Egypt and looking into all this archaeology and stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, this happened. It's so cool. And something important to remember is it's ancient literature. So it's very, very old. Like, this is thousands of years ago that this happened. So there's a huge gap between where we live and where they lived. And so it's important to not try to put all of this into our time frame of our culture, our bias, how we see the world. And to remember that they are different people, different time, different culture, different nation, different problems, different ways of thinking. One really practical example is, I learned this the other day, that every time you see the word mind in the Hebrew Bible, it's actually the word for kidney, because that's where they thought like all of their will and their thoughts and everything came from, was their kidney. So that's, in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, they're definitely a different culture. They see things different. Their thoughts come from their kidney, apparently.
But that, like, makes sense. Like, they're like, take the kidney. And,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
like in the first part of Leviticus. I'm like,
Yeah.
Oh.
Exactly. You're already making the connections. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's, write that down.
Right.
It was also written in a different language. So that's important to note. Translators have done really well, but there's still a few words that we don't fully know what they mean. For example, one of the leathers or skins in the tabernacle, people don't know if it's just like fine leather or if they're actually using dolphin leather. Like, there's different theories on what that word means. But those are like the exceptions, and our Bibles are really good at putting footnotes. If they're like, this could mean this other word as well, or this isn't specifically translated. It's written in different literary styles. So something I'm going to talk about today is the types of literature that these books are written in. I'm going to unpack a little bit of the style of narrative, the style of law. I'm going to leave, things like prophecy, apocalyptic, like all of those when they're more relevant to other books. But when you understand the type of literature and how it's written and how they use this style to communicate things and all of the characteristics of it, it unpacks the true meaning so much more. And it was written to a different audience, going through different problems, asking different questions than we would have. What can be frustrating about these books is the questions that you have, they're not actually answering for you. They're not trying to answer. Because these books are written specifically for a specific people and what they needed to know. The Bible was not written to you, but it was written for you. That's like one of the things we say in SBS all the time. Not to you, but for you. Like, there's so much truth in life for us in here, but we have to remember who it was actually written to, and what purposes they have in mind and what they needed to hear. Any questions so far? I'm saying a lot of things. Basically, I'm just trying to say, remember that this is old, that there is an audience and an author that have specific purposes. And remember that there's actually a big gap in between how we see the world and how they see the world. But if we can jump into how they see things, what they needed to hear, what the author was trying to say back then we can jump that gap and we can ask, okay, how does this apply to us so much more accurately, with so much more truth? Some of the ways we can do this is by getting to know the author of these books, by getting to know the people that it was written to. I really want to try to do that today, help you get to know who it was written to. By learning the culture, type of literature, like I said, and the structure of the book. That is my favorite thing that we do in SBS. It's the first, in SBS, first we read the whole book out loud, like you guys do. And then what we do is we build a structure on the book. So it's a whole thing, but we give every paragraph a title. And then we lump all the paragraphs together and we put divisions and we basically split up the book into different sections and find out how the author's flow of thought is moving, what things go together, what things don't. And it just gives us this amazing context for looking at the book as a whole. And so I'm going to show you some of these structures as we go through the book today. But honestly, that's my favorite thing to do, is even just breaking up the book into chunks makes everything make sense. Not everything, but after I do that, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to teach the book. I can do it. I can tell you all about it. It's so crazy helpful. So that's fun. And then obviously it's very important to apply this to our lives. We can't just sit in, okay, those are different people with different problems. That's not where we end. That's not where we stop. We don't stop at that distance. We start there, but then we bring it to ourselves. And we say, okay, how does this change my life? What is still true for me today? How do I live this out? Yeah, that's the whole reason that we study the Bible, right? Is how, what do we learn from this? How do we respond to this? And something that I've loved after studying the Bible, the Old Testament specifically, is how, if you've grown up in church, or if you've been to church, you've been told God is faithful. God is holy. God is gracious. He is all of these things. And you can believe them, and you can sing that in a worship song and declare it. But once you've read the Old Testament and actually studied it, you can say, oh, God is faithful. Oh my gosh, he is actually holy and is actually the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And the way that you can worship God after understanding these concepts is so much deeper and so much more powerful. Studying the Bible makes these things that you've been told real to you. And that's my favorite thing that it's done, is I can actually say, I know what it means to say that God is holy and to declare that like it's the most beautiful truth I've ever said. Yeah. But you will also be frustrated because these books are frustrating for multiple reasons. One, because the people are frustrating and sin is real and they miss the point over and over and over again. They make the wrong choices over and over and over again. They should know better. After the things that they've seen and the fact that these books are recorded for them, they should know better. We think, okay, if I can just see God, if I can just see a miracle, I'll never doubt again. I'll believe my whole life. I will do everything God says. If you can just show me this or do this, I'll never stray. But Israel is proof that that's not true. Because all of the plagues in Egypt, God breaking open the sea for them to walk across it, seeing God's presence on the mountain, they still fail over and over and over and over again. It's a constant journey that we're on with God. Yeah, and hopefully this will humble you, because we are the same. We are still sinful. We are still broken. We still make the wrong choices. We still should know better. So this is really our story too. And so I hope that these stories will humble you in your own sin, but also bring you to worship God for who he is in such a deeper way. Yeah. That's my heart and my prayer for these books. So I'm going to pray, and then I have some questions for you. Okay, Lord, I'm so, so excited and blessed to be able to spend so much time in your word this week and all of the weeks leading up to this to study, Lord. I love these first books. Thank you for the gift that they are, for how much they teach us, for how much life they bring to us, for how they transform how we see you, how we see ourselves, and how we move through this world. I just pray over class today, Lord, that you would bless it, and that you will be here with us, that you will just consume this room and set fire to our hearts, Lord. Help us to be able to listen and to take in your truths. And I just pray that you will inspire us and change us today. Lord, will you be with my words? Help me to say only the things that you want me to say. And just speak your truths through me, Lord. Amen. Okay, Genesis. Will you guys just tell me what are some of the important things that's happening in Genesis? The big things that God's doing. Creation. That's a big one, obviously.
The fall.
Mm-hmm.
Fall.
Mm-hmm.
Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
Abrahamic covenant.
Yes.
Noah, the flood.
Yeah.
Later on,
Abraham.
tabernacle.
Yeah.
Abraham sacrificed and Isaac.
Yeah.
Mm.
Joseph. Was that
Joseph,
Esau?
Nice.
Isaac,
Yeah.
No,
And-
it's
Jacob.
Yeah. So why are all those things important? Why are they written down? What's God doing through all of them?
Showing his
Showing
GRP.
Showing what?
his GRP. his redemptive plan.
Yeah.
We say
Is that-
GRP is God's redemptive plan.
Yeah.
That's like
It's short form, we can use it, right?
That's so cute.
Sorry.
I love that.
That's
It's the
just
GRP.
assuming that you know.
Why? Why those things? Tell me a little bit more. Like, why is, the Abrahamic covenant a part of God's redemptive plan happening?
Well, he's like choosing a specific people to pass through his bloodline, I guess, to like, it says like to show like that, to show them that he is God, and show that the rest of the world that he is God.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, as like God making a covenant with Abraham, like just making it, like separating him for the rest of the world, and like to bear the fruit, like and the like Jesus.
Yes.
That like because with sin it is impossible, so God is like separating them and making as a new different nation. Like God wants to be like a different nation, holy nation.
Yes.
So that the holy fruit can come out from that people.
Yeah.
So that is Jesus. So that's why he's
Awesome.
making the covenant and he's making them separate and he's giving. So that's why he says every time, come out and be holy, and because I'm the God who's holy, and you so try to do this, and so that, and he says like in between lines we can see you'll have this, and whenever like we can see on the mount of what's that?
Not Sinai?
No, like Moriah.
Oh.
I can't pronounce it. Like,
Yeah. Moriah.
Like Isaac sacrificed Mount Moriah. Yeah. So we can see that there is like a GRP which starts here on the plan. We can find it here, and then lots and lots we can see. So in order to bring the holy one from the nation, it's not possible. So that's why it makes the covenant different.
Yeah. Amazing. Great summary. Cool. Anything else in Genesis? Important for God's redemptive plan? Important for context? That
It's like Jacob and Joseph going to Egypt.
Yes.
And Jacob immigrating to Egypt because God already says to Abraham, for sure you'll be there for 400 years in the foreign land, and I'll bring you with power, and as an army I'll bring you out. So he says even before he had a son, Isaac, like Abraham had a son, so that could be a main thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, now same for Exodus. What's happening in Exodus that's important for our overarching story?
People getting suffered.
Yeah.
These guys sees that.
And the 10 plagues. And showing his sovereignty over all the Egyptian gods. And then rescuing his people out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And the province. Yeah. And giving them like the 10 commandments and showing them kind of how to live and how to be a people. They don't really know how to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Providing for them. Holiness.
The manna.
Yeah.
And then just giving him like the law and just like how, like showing him how he wants them to live in a holy way.
Absolutely. Nice. What else?
Moses being saved.
Yes.
Like in the basket.
Yeah.
And then God parting the Red Sea. The big one, I'd say.
Yeah.
Not something you see every day.
God makes a covenant with them as well. Exodus 19, I think, is so important. I don't know how much you guys went into this, but Exodus 19, verse 4 to 6. I have the ESV. Does anyone want to read in your translation? Exodus 19, 4-6?
Yep. 4-6.
Yep.
You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wing and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the people on earth, for all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel.
Yes. That's what we refer to as the key verse of Exodus. Like, to me and to other people, this like defines the book of Exodus. Like, you yourselves have seen what I did. Okay, you saw that I rescued you and how miraculous that was and brought you to myself. So what were they saved for? To bring to God or God. Now, therefore, if, okay, one of the biggest ifs of all time, if you obey my covenant, or if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So this is what God is doing with them. He saved them, he ransomed them, he bought them from Egypt, so that they could be to him a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's just really helpful to see kind of what God is doing with them now. He's making them into a kingdom of priests and holy nation. So priests are mediators between God and the people. So he wants them to be that, mediators between God and the people. And he wants them to be holy, set apart, different. We're going to really unpack holiness either today or tomorrow. We'll see.
What does it mean if though? Like, if you obey me, then and you keep my covenant, then you will be my special treasure. Like, doesn't, regardless, even though they don't obey him, like he still does that, right? So what does that mean?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So the covenant that God made with Abraham is what's called an unconditional covenant. So there's no condition. Nothing. It does not matter what Abraham does. God says, "This is what I'm going to do through you." And then there's this covenant, which is conditional, if you obey me. And this will really become clear specifically in Deuteronomy, where he lays out, if you obey, you will get all of these blessings. This happens in Leviticus too. You will get all of these blessings. If you disobey, you will be cursed and cut off. But you're right. That's not actually the end of the story. I'm just debating how much I want to go into this now or leave it for Deuteronomy. I think I want to leave you hanging on the if you obey, if you don't. Because there is a very important conditional here. They have to obey. But then, God stays faithful. And I'm going to show you how he does that. Okay. More in Deuteronomy. Yeah. You're really right. That's very interesting. So yeah. If you obey. It's in their hands. Sort of. But it is. But it's not. Anyways, we'll get into that. And then what's another thing that happens at the end of Exodus? Yes. 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 Yeah, so God has Moses and Aaron set up this tabernacle so that he can dwell with them. Absolutely revolutionary. God being with his people, they get to live amongst his actual presence. We're going to go into the tabernacle a bit more. But yeah, then the end of Exodus ends in this climax. They build the tabernacle. All of these instructions are fulfilled, and then the glory fills it, which is crazy that God's glory fills the temple like that. Yeah. So that's what God's been doing so far in just a big summary. And so I want to give you a little bit of kind of an overview of this, the rest of the Pentateuch. So, 1446, this is there's two potential datings for this, but I'm not really going to get into that. I don't know if you went into that with Exodus, but... Okay, so this is the view that takes the most literal view of the dates in the Bible. Other view kind of takes it more symbolically and kind of relies a bit more on archaeology and outside things. But this one is the most literal to the Bible view, so I took that one. But anyways, okay, this was a big year. Whether it was 1446 or not. This was a big year for Israel. They were taken out of Egypt. They were given the 10 Commandments. The golden calf incident happens. Big bummer. Tabernacle is built, and the book of Leviticus is given to the Levites. And then the year after, Israel fails to enter the Promised Land. They send their spies in to go check out the land. They come back. They tell a story of fear to the people. People are too scared to go in. And they could have been, going on their merry way. But instead, boom, we have 40 years in the wilderness, just wandering around, waiting for that generation to die. Because God is so angry, he says, okay, fine. If you don't want to go into the Promised Land, you won't. None of you will. So they have to wait until all of those people die so that their kids can go in instead. So then there's all of this time journeying in the wilderness. And then finally, they start to conquer the land east of the Jordan. So the Promised Land is, I'll show a map in a minute, west of the Jordan. And so they're kind of making their way up. They start to conquer some places east. Then they stop. Moses gives them speeches, renews the covenant. And then they finally cross into the Promised Land. Okay? So if you're kind of breaking that down by book, Exodus is kind of here and, a few events earlier. Leviticus is all given within like a month.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah. And then Numbers is when they failed to enter the Promised Land. They journey, and it talks about how they're starting to conquer. And then Deuteronomy does a recap of this, but almost all of Deuteronomy is speeches of Moses.
Can we get these slides?
I can send them out.
Yeah, I'll give you my emails and stuff.
Awesome.
Because this is really good.
Awesome. A little bit of context. I'm actually hot. I told you I would get hot when I was out here.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyways. Did you guys get that down? I can send it. You want me to go back?
Yeah,
Oh,
maybe if you send it.
Yeah, if you send it, that'll be fine.
That's fine. Okay. Cool. So here's a map, and kind of a bit of, what's covered. So Exodus is Egypt takes them all the way to Mount Sinai. Leviticus all happens around Mount Sinai. There's not really any narrative movement at all, as you might have seen. And then Numbers, they're all over the place. They leave from Mount Sinai and they go all the way up to here. And then Deuteronomy all takes place, other than they do a recap, but then the narrative of Deuteronomy all takes place here, right before they enter into the Promised Land. So like I said, like the land of Canaan, kind of like up here is the land. And then they go up here, hang out here for Deuteronomy, to boom, cross over and start fighting. So that's kind of a visual of where we are.
So I think you mentioned this in the Bible, but why did they take the different route? Why did they just go straight to?
Oh, yes. God says he didn't want them to see other nations and be scared of them.
Right, okay.
So he took them another way so that they wouldn't, run into other nations, basically.
Right.
And then, it was only a 2-week journey from Mount Sinai into the Promised Land. But because of their failure and their punishment, they kind of zigzag all over the place.
Mm.
So they came from Canaan, like Jacob went to Canaan.
Yes.
And then they all went down to Goshen in Israel,
Yeah.
not in Israel, Goshen in
Egypt. Yeah.
And then they went back down to Mount Sinai. Where's the Red Sea?
That's actually, no one knows for sure.
Oh, it's somewhere in there.
Yeah. I mean, it says on here it's here, but it's kind of debated where it actually is.
Oh,
But
that's cool.
here.
Okay.
I think it's so cool to see visually, actually, how much time is spent paused right here in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
Big chunk of Exodus, all of Leviticus, big chunk of Numbers is all spent right here around Mount Sinai, which is literally in the wilderness. Like, there are no nations around there. They're surrounded by water here. It's like almost unlivable up here, and everyone else lives like all around them. And I think it's so cool that God brought them there and pauses them to say, this is who I am. This is who you are. Let's set up my dwelling place. Let's set up all these systems. Let's learn the law. And then take you out into the world.
Yeah. And he still does that, like, today. Like, he'll take you to places and...
Yes.
That's so crazy.
Wilderness is a big theme throughout the Bible.
Yeah. I have my deepest revelations in my, like, wilderness
Yeah.
seasons. But that's cool to see. I'm such a visual person. It's cool to see, like... Yeah, that's cool.
That is very cool. Yeah, there's definitely a theme of wilderness. And it's like, you know, the wilderness is scary. Like, it's barren. Like, they can't harvest. They can't plant anything. There's wild animals. Like, there's a reason that no one else lives there, right? But then we see God making a way for them to live in that space. He provides for them. He gives them water. He gives them manna. He gives them, it says somewhere that their sandals didn't even wear out. I don't know where that is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like their clothes and sandals.
What?
Their clothes and sandals didn't wear out.
Yeah. But yeah, it's so intentional of God to take them away from the corruption of the other nations so that they can just be with him, just learn his ways. Because we know Israel has a problem being corrupted by the other nations. It happens over and over and over and over again. So God knew that. He took them away. He took them to a place when it was just them to teach them all of these things. Yeah, and then they move on. Any questions or thoughts here?
That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, another type of overview is, this is kind of a structure we'll talk about in a few different places, but it's called a chiasm. You know about chiasm?
We just learned that.
Oh, you did? Cool. So you could see the whole Pentateuch as a chiasm, with Leviticus in the middle, which is interesting. So Genesis is like the beginning of generations. Exodus, origin of the nation of Israel. Leviticus, tribe of Levi, so it's getting more specific with people. And then it kind of goes back out again. The development of the nation of Israel, and then unto all generations. They keep going. But there's more. Okay? Genesis, promising the promised land. Exodus, saved from Egypt into the wilderness. Leviticus, centered around the tabernacle. Numbers, saved in the wilderness, prohibited from the promised land. And then Deuteronomy, preparing to enter the promised land. And again, okay, Genesis, looking back centuries. Exodus covers decades. Leviticus covers 1 month. Numbers covers decades, and then Deuteronomy is looking forward to centuries again. Yeah, kind of fun, hey?
Yeah.
Leviticus is in the middle of all of that, which we're going to talk about. And then just for context, after all of this comes Joshua. That's where Joshua is all about them conquering the promised land. So this is all, in a way, kind of a build up to the promised land. The promised land is where they're supposed to be dwelling with God. They have all their systems set up. They're being obedient to the law. They've got everything they need. It's like fertile, and there's milk and honey, and there's huge grapes, and there's just everything that they need. But God does a lot with them before he actually brings them into this land. Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to go through all of this was because of what I talked about, the original audience. So the people that were actually reading the people that these books were recorded for were living around this time. Okay? So there's 2 separate groups of people. There's what we refer to in SBS as the original hearers. So that's the people that are hearing Moses speak the law. The people that are in the story. And then there's the readers, the people that have had this recorded and are listening to it read for them later on.
In context to the terminology that we use, the original audience is the original hearers.
Nice.
And then you have the original readers. We still
Yeah.
use that same
Okay, cool.
like terminology, but we just use original audience instead
Great.
of original hearers.
Yeah. Okay, and why that's important is because there's the people that are witnessing these events. Okay, they've seen it, they've been in it. And that's a very interesting perspective to think from. But then there's the people who are reading it, which Moses recorded all of this in a specific way for a specific purpose. And he didn't record this for the people that lived it. He recorded it so later people would understand what they went through. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So why it's this group of people right here is because, remember, the whole first generation that witnessed all of this dies before they enter the promised land. So God pauses them again right before they enter the promised land, has Moses write all of this down, and presents it to them again, saying, this is what you need to know before you enter the promised land. This is what your ancestors in Genesis and your parents saw and went through. This is what God did for us in the wilderness. These are his laws. These are his commands. This is who he is. Mm-hmm. Now, when you enter the promised land, when you conquer all these people and when you go to dwell there, this is what you need to know about him. This is what you need to know about who you are as we're about to do this. So all of these books are written and recorded in a specific way. There's so much history here, but only some of it is written down. And you can think of actually God and Moses saying, okay, what specific stories need to be told for these people that are about to enter the promised land? What do they need to hear and how do they need to hear it? And that's a really helpful way to answer some of our questions. Because if we come into a weird passage and we're like, I don't know what this means. You think about, okay, who was it actually written to? What were their questions? What did they need to hear? Oh, this is what they needed out of this passage. That's why it's recorded. And that answers so many questions. I'm totally broke from my notes, which is fine. Okay, yeah, so who are these original readers? They are the second generation. It's kind of what they're referred to as the second generation of Israel. The first generation of Israel is, God starts to make them a nation. And the second generation is their children who enter the promised land. They were born in the wilderness, or some of them were born in Egypt, but they were very young. They've only ever eaten manna. They've been told the stories of the Exodus and these great miracles by their parents, so they either didn't witness it or don't really have memory of it themselves, which is important. They were raised surrounded by grumbling and complaining. Once we read Numbers and learn about what their time in the wilderness is actually like, you learn that their parents were kind of very annoying, complaining about everything. That's who they were raised by. They know that their destiny, they know what's coming next is they're going to fight in war. They're being raised as warriors to go into the land and clear it out from all the people that live there. They know that's what's coming in their lifetime. That's what they're preparing for. And they know that they are stuck here until their parents die, which is really weird to think about, actually.
Do you think that the parents, did they know that they weren't ever going to make it into the promised land? Because we know that now.
Yeah, God tells them that right when they disobey, or right when they get too scared to enter the promised land. They say, we don't go do it. And God says, okay, you won't. We're going to wait 40 years in the wilderness for you to die. And then your kids will go in. So they know. Yeah. And these original readers this is an exact map of where they've gone, okay, first of all. But it brings the point. They've kind of zoomed all around over here. And then they end up right here, paused in Deuteronomy right before they enter the promised land. And like I said, what they know about the promised land, milk and honey, grapes, trees, it's very fertile, beautiful land, but they also know there's going to be war and that there are scary people there. So this is what they know is coming for them. Yeah.
Is that present day Jordan? Where they are before they go to the promised land?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, cool. Because it says is that Ammon?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like Ammon is the capital in Jordan.
Is it?
So,
I don't know enough about. I've never been over there. I would love to go over there.
Oh, so you did go.
yeah. No, well, yeah, but before the promised, that's where we were. That's where we were. I was just
Cool.
in Jordan last year, so
Was it amazing?
yeah. We got to go over it this way too.
I would love to go.
Yeah.
Someday I will. Dang, that's cool. So yeah, big question as they're, preparing to cross that river. That river is kind of the boundary line, the Jordan River. Like once they cross the Jordan River, they're in the promised land. So that's kind of like the barrier to it. And so the question is like, are they going to trust God in the promised land? Are they going to trust him for all of these things that he's promised them, that he's going to give them the land, that he's going to fight for them, that they're going to dwell there, that he's going to be with them? Are they going to trust him for all of those things? And then as they go into the promised land, are they going to do it God's way? So kind of, some of their big overarching questions that they need to know before they do this is, who are we? Where did we come from? What's our identity? Like they've been kind of stripped of all of that in Egypt. Remember, they have 400 years of slavery. So they don't even know who they are until God comes in and tells them, this was your history. These are your ancestors. This is what I've been doing with you. This is who you are. And then they need to know, who is God? What is our relationship with him? And is he worth devoting our lives to? Is he worth being our king? And the Pentateuch is answering all these questions for them, preparing them. You guys have any questions or thoughts about this whole idea of the original reader and who this was written to?
Not any questions, but this does help a lot, like reading it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it helps it make more sense.
Yeah. You kind of have to think forward as you're reading to like, who's receiving this.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. When do you guys usually take a break?
About 11:15-ish. So you have about another 45 minutes.
Okay.
But it's also up to you.
I mean, we could do a short break now if anyone would like that.
Yeah,
Kind of a good stopping point.
Good bathroom.
Okay, let's do that. Okay. Yeah, a few more technical things. Like I said, I want to kind of go into the literature because it helps us, gives us a lens to understand what we're reading. Understand what we're reading. Mm-hmm. So narrative literature. So that's based around stories and events. Mm-hmm. So pretty much all of Genesis, about half-ish of Exodus, barely any of Leviticus. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. And then bigger chunk of Numbers again, and then Deuteronomy doesn't have that much narrative in it either. So, you guys can probably notice the difference between narrative and law, just kind of instinctually. It's very different. So narrative is stories and events. And so some specific things to know about narrative literature is its history recorded for a specific purpose needed in that specific time. So like I was saying, these books are written specifically for the original reader for specific purposes. So each book kind of has its own specific purpose as well, which we'll get into once we get into the books. Not designed to answer your questions, right? So it's not, Leviticus was not written to someone who lives, in America in 2025 to answer the questions about, should you move to Turkey and do missions full time? Like that's not what this book is recorded for. Okay. And not even the theological questions you might have. It's designed for the specific purposes of that time, and what's needed then. But it does answer a lot of great questions that we have. we just can kind of get stuck on the questions that it doesn't answer and forget about all the many, many, many questions that it does answer. It mainly follows what God did and what the people did, and usually doesn't provide commentary on why. So sometimes that can be frustrating. It's just like, okay, here's the story, here's what happened, and it doesn't actually say, and they should have done this, or if they would have done this, it would have gone better, or this is why God punished them this way, or, it doesn't always say that. It's recorded history. It's not always for moral lessons or theological answers. Whereas in a New Testament letter, this is more expected. So in a New Testament letter, you're kind of expecting it to answer theological questions and tell you how to live.
Mm-hmm.
But the narrative literature does not have that same purpose. It's history recorded, like I said. But the law is the measurement of right and wrong more than the results or the implication of the story. Okay, so a story itself might not be able to tell you what was right or wrong or morally what they should have done, but it's assuming that the reader would know the law, and so they can go back to the law and be like, oh, this is actually wrong because of this command. Or this is what they should have done because God told them to do this. Does that make sense? So the law is supposed to be the measurement, and these books are assuming that the reader knows the law. The best way to take it is scene by scene. It's kind of written in that kind of chunk, like one scene or one story at a time. And often each scene has its own kind of purpose or main idea to it. And obviously they all connect into the book as a whole, but you can usually take one scene, which is much better than taking, one sentence or one moment. Sometimes can be confusing, like what is happening here. But if you take it a scene at a time, you can kind of see the big thing that's unfolding and get the main purpose a lot easier. Dialogue is very intentional. If you think about it, if you're recording history, or if you're, writing if you're journaling about what you did today, and then you stop and you write down a conversation, obviously that's going to be important for you to stop and write down a specific conversation. So those are very intentional. And the author might be communicating through subtle clues. So take notes of scenes that are beside each other or patterns that repeat. For example, sometimes you can only know what the author's trying to say by looking at two stories together and comparing them. Or maybe there's an underlying pattern throughout all of these stories that kind of create this narrative underneath. I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, the easiest example is like Samuel's, which is later on. You guys haven't gotten there yet, but it's really clear where the book of Samuel's is narrative, but what it does is it goes back and forth between Saul and David, Saul and David, Saul and David. And what you're supposed to understand is by those stories beside each other, you're supposed to contrast how David is a better ruler than Saul. Even though the author doesn't say it, it's spoken in the underlying message because it goes back and forth between them. Does that make sense? So that's one way that you can get kind of what the author's trying to communicate is by looking at the arrangement of the stories and looking at them in context. Does this make sense? Do you have any questions on this? This is kind of how we're supposed to approach narrative literature.
So with the Pentateuch, so in the present times, is it like I don't know how to phrase this, but so the Pentateuch 5 books. So you said it's not for the moral lessons or theological answers. So will that same apply for the Jews now, like Jewish people
today?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the intention of narrative literature. The Jews today, I don't really know. I mean, they would take the law. The law is intended for morality, how to learn, what we're supposed to do morally. So that's the bigger source of that question, if that makes sense, than the narratives. And obviously, you can make a preaching out of a narrative story. and learn some really cool things about, what to do and what not to do. But it's not intended necessarily for that purpose. Does that make sense? Or not every story. You can't assume that every story is trying to tell you how you should be. I don't know your question about the Jews.
I was thinking like just how much will it be applicable for Jews today? So all the Pentateuch.
Oh, all the Pentateuch?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, I mean, that's a whole thing because the major problem you'll see with
because
Pentateuch.
why I'm asking is because it was written for the original readers or audience who are like Jewish or Israelites.
Yeah.
So still they are Jewish and Israelites. So
Yes.
how much it can be applicable or
Right.
how much it is.
I mean, in a way, like, the New Testament is written for believers, which we are believers. But we still can't take everything in the New Testament and apply it directly to our lives because some of it is still culturally relevant to them or to their specific church. Do you know what I mean? So we, even now, even if you can say, like, the New Testament is written for believers in Jesus, it doesn't mean you can take everything and automatically directly say, this is how it applies to me. So I would almost say the same for the Jews. But, like, there's a bigger problem in the modern day Jews because they don't have a temple. They don't have priesthood. Like, they don't have all of these things in place that the Pentateuch is centered around. So they can't practice a lot of these things that they're supposed to.
So they don't do sacrifices?
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit about that through Leviticus, but they have their own struggles of how does this apply because they can't. But they're still supposed to because they don't have Jesus. But it's still removed and it's still a different culture and it's still ancient literature. But they don't have a temple. So it's very confusing. Does that answer enough of your question?
Yeah, it did.
I think that's as much as I can answer it.
Yes, it did answer.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, let's talk about law literature. I found this really cool article. I think it was John Piper, where it talks about law literature and the purposes of it, which is really cool. So law literature is comprised of commands and instructions, which you guys have seen. Do this, don't do this. Commands from God. And this is a very interesting list of 10 things that the law is meant to do. Okay? 1, to reveal the holiness of God. God is holy, and he needs to be interacted with and responded to in a specific way because of his holiness. 2, it reveals the sin of man, how far we actually have fallen from our original intent and our original design. These things highlight sin. 3, to reveal the standard of holiness required of those in fellowship with God. So in order to be with God, they had to be holy. And so this kind of reveals what that would look like, what that should look like. 4, to supervise, which is an interesting word, supervise, physical, mental, and spiritual development of redeemed Israelites until they should come to maturity in Christ, which I think answers a lot of our questions about the law. I don't know if you've talked about this yet, but when they've come out of Exodus, they have been slaves with no identity, no government, no rule of themselves, really almost nothing. And they're kind of like children. Like, they don't really know who God is. They don't know how to live for themselves. They don't know how to take charge of themselves. And so God gives them the law to supervise them, to teach them, but it was until they should be mature in Christ, which I think is very helpful language. 5, to be the unifying principle that made the establishment of the nation possible. Like, imagine a nation today without laws or without systems of how they're going to do things. Like, that just doesn't work. They need the unifying principle of this is how we're going to be in order for them to practically be a nation together. 6, to separate Israel from the nations to become a kingdom of priests. So this is helpful because a lot of the times when a weird law comes up that doesn't make any sense, you're like, God, why is that even important to you? Why do you need to say this? Oftentimes it's because it's something that the other nations are doing that God does not want them to do. So the law is meant to separate Israel, which is literally what holiness means, being set apart or different, from the other nations that are doing evil things. So the law is making them different. 7, to make provision for forgiveness of sins and restoration to fellowship. So what the law is doing, and the sacrifices are a part of this as well, is allowing them to be forgiven and restored with God. Super cool. We think of the law as like just this harsh regulations and like really oppressive and restrictive, but what it's actually doing is bringing them into fellowship with God. It's restoring them. All of these brokenness and all of these debts that they have to God when they sin, the law is making a way to redeem them with him. 8, to make provision for redeemed people to worship by observing and participating in the yearly festivals. The festivals are very interesting. You'll get to them later in Leviticus. But God gives them a lot of things to celebrate and remember in all of these rituals. And they are for a lot of purposes, but worship is one of them. 9, to provide a test, whether one was in the kingdom over which God ruled. That one's like almost more specific. But like the blessings and curses, which is what this verse reference is speaking to, is, are you in God's kingdom or not? Are you following his ways or not? The curses were meant to reveal that. The curses were meant to be warnings, like, oh, you're obviously not following God because it's not going well for you right now. Maybe you should turn back into the law. So they are a test in a way. And number 10, obviously, to reveal Christ, to show them, give them hints, push them to the Savior and the Messiah that's coming, to fulfill all these laws, to be the sacrifice, to be the Passover lamb, to redeem them into fellowship with him once and for all. So I found this very, very, very helpful, purposes of the law. But if I had to summarize or say like some really important things to note out of all of this is, 1, what the law does is it sets standards for relationship and for worship. This is what it takes to be in relationship with God. 1, he needs them to be holy, so he can be in their presence. And 2, he shows them how to worship, for relationship. Oh, and the sacrifices, to, kind of cross that barrier of the debt and the sin that they have committed to be with God again. And 2, that the law is actually not for salvation. I don't know if you talked about this, but something that Exodus lays out for us is that they are saved first and then giving the law to live God's way and to live in relationship with God. It's not a means to salvation. It is a result after salvation, which is so good, super cool. The law was meant to teach them. It's not complete. Not everything that you should not do is in the law. Okay? Not every scenario that they can give you an if this, then do this exists in the law. Okay? It's not complete. There's no way. But what it is supposed to do is teach them the general principles, the general way of relating to God, the general way of relating to each other, so that they can learn almost like, so they can build character. So that they can understand God's way, so it can build their character, so it can build their understanding of how to live in the world. And then, like it says, come to maturity in Christ. So it's meant to teach them principles and values. And one of the reasons, I don't think I said this yet, one of the reasons Deuteronomy is my favorite book in the whole Bible is because what it reveals about the law is that it's about their hearts. Are their hearts fully after God? Are they going to love God with all of their heart? Are they going to fear God with all of their heart? Because if they do that, then that completes the law. If their hearts are fully in tune and fully after God, they've completed the law, they're obedient. But we know that the problem is not their ability to keep the law. It's their heart to make the choice not to obey the law. And that's revealed over and over and over again. And something interesting, the law is worthy of delighting in. Psalm 119 is the biggest psalm in the Psalms, and it's all about how much the psalmist loves the law, delights in it, brings them so much life. It's the best thing. They're just, eating it up every morning, every night. Like, it's beautiful. The law is the light to their feet, lamp to their path, other way around. But even then, like, the psalmist that wrote that psalm was before Jesus. And they are still writing this massive song about how much they love the law. Even without looking back from where we're looking back and saying, oh, Jesus fulfilled it, so, like, I don't have a problem with the law anymore. But no, when they are in it, when they are following it fully, they're delighting in it and it's bringing them life. They can worship God for the law. That was what it was supposed to be. Any questions, thoughts? Does this make you think anything? Does this make you, have any questions?
I have a question. It just came to mind as we were talking about this, but so Israel's God's chosen nation.
Yeah.
And I know in the New Testament, it says Jesus came for redemption for all. But during this time, there's all these other people that are around him that are doing or I guess then, that are worshiping gods and making other idols and stuff. So I guess the question that kind of came to mind was what's God's heart for all the other people that are just actively living in sin?
Yeah.
Because they're the Israelites still live in sin, but he constantly redeems them.
Mm-hmm.
What about all the other people that aren't his chosen people?
Yeah. So what we see in multiple stories is that the other nations were allowed to come into Israel and be a part of their rituals and their laws and join in with Israel.
Yeah.
Even though the bigger attitude towards the other nations in the Pentateuch is kill them, destroy them because they are evil, which is what they deserve. That's what they all deserve. There are still the underlying stories where we see the other nations accept God and actually come in to the promise, which is really cool. Even in Exodus, a mixed multitude comes out of Egypt. Egyptians come with them, which is super cool. So the other nations have a choice as well.
Yeah, I was just reading that in Leviticus. I think it said something about the Israelites and the foreigners living in the land.
Yeah.
With them.
There's a lot of laws about the foreigners. How they're supposed to treat them with respect and allow them in and, let them do all these things. Sometimes they have a bit of different restrictions, but they're not circumcised. There are some differences, but they're allowed in. Sometimes they have to do different things in a different way, but they can be a part of it.
Okay. I didn't catch that part. I didn't realize that Egyptians left.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of an awkward story in Leviticus. Too, where this son of an Egyptian is killed for blaspheming God. Yeah. Which is a sucky story, but shows there are Egyptians there with them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's in Leviticus?
Yeah, let me find it. It's one of the 2 narrative stories in Leviticus. Um, 24:10. Now an Israelite woman's son whose father was an Egyptian. So there's at least a half Egyptian there. I don't know if the father was with them, but it's cool.
Whoa.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, yeah.
Any other questions about law?
Would you be able to repeat the last thing you were saying about the lighting in God's law, if he's meant for?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the law is meant to bring life, and it's meant to bring relationship with God, and so the law should be the most beautiful thing. that they can praise God and thank God for. And it's just crazy that Psalm 119 is all about that. Even, while they were under the law, that's an example that the law was meant to be delighted in and was possible to be delighted in, that it was so beautiful. And I'll talk about it a bit in another session, but how God interacts with them is so different than how the other gods would interact with their people. The other religions, they had no idea what their gods wanted. They had no idea how to please their gods, how to make them happy. They were just guessing all the time. And the only time they would know if they pleased their god or not was, if they received a baby or if their crops worked out or whatever. But God tells them exactly what he wants from them and exactly what he's going to do for them, and exactly what it's going to look like when he's happy, and exactly what it looks like when they're disobeying and God's angry, which is, we can't see it as much now, but when they had seen the other gods and how other people interact with other gods, I really believe that they could have seen this as absolutely a gift. Oh my gosh, our God is communicating with us. He's speaking to us, and he's telling us what he wants from us.
Wow.
Very, very cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you said the problem is that their hearts hindered their ability to...
Yes. Yeah. The problem was not the law or their obedience or disobedience to the law. The problem was that their heart, it's the same now. We sin now, not because we don't know better, not because we don't trust God. Well, I mean, often it is. But because our hearts choose, we make a choice. Right. We choose something else other than God's way. And that's the same thing for them. It's their broken, sick hearts that are the problem, more than it's their ability to keep the law. So even though we have this law that, should be able to tell them how to be in perfect relationship with God, it still reveals that there's an underlying problem, that their hearts are still broken. There's still a deeper solution that needs to come. Which will come. Yeah. Any other questions? Let's just do one more slide and then we can do your break. Just kind of technical. There are a few different categories of law. I never say this word right. Apodictic. Something like that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. These are the laws that are binding at all times. Begin with do or do not do this. They're direct commands. They are also not exhaustive, but those are the 10 commandments. Do this. Don't do this. Binding at all times for them. It's not something that they can negotiate with. Don't have any other gods. That's a law for all time. Causistic law. These are the ones that, if this happens, then do this. If your ox kills your neighbor, then this is what you shall do about it. These ones are conditional. They do not apply to everyone, only the people in that situation, the people that it affects. And none of these are specifically renewed in the New Covenant, which is interesting.
Oh, wow.
There's just a quick side tangent, there's some debate, which laws are relevant for us now. Is it only the ones that the New Testament reiterates and says, we are still supposed to follow these? So do you take those and you throw out everything else? Or do you go the opposite way and you keep everything unless the New Testament tells you not to? There's kind of two different camps, and there's kind of a scale in between of how you see which laws are relevant and which aren't. I mean, definitely the ones that are reiterated in the New Testament. Of course, we believe that that's the truth, and we're going to follow those. Obviously, if you don't have an ox, you don't have to worry about those laws about ox. Right. But if you do, is that something that you still follow that way? And I would say, what I would say is what is for sure relevant under each law is the heart behind and the value behind each law. Even if you don't have to pay the same amount of shekels, that's not even relevant. We can't even, if you have an ox and it kills someone, you can't pay 16 shekels or whatever it is to repay for that. But what you can do is take the heart of the law, which says if your property destroy someone else's, pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, make it right. Keep relationship with your neighbor by making up for what happened. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, behind every law, there's a value behind it. And those are still true.
Oh.
Okay. And then the other 3 categories is moral law. So those are principles that determine what is right or wrong, guidelines for living. Kind of just more of the general things. There's civil law, laws that deal with social justice and crimes. And then there's ritual law, laws about worshiping, ceremonies, feasts, sacrifices, etc. So sometimes those can be helpful lenses. Some just be like, oh, this is the civil law. Oh, this is moral. Yeah, any questions? Law overview? Cool. That's, sorry, it's 11:20, but do you want to take, how long
No,
do
you're
you take?
fine. You guys want to take another break, or we're good to keep going, or
Good.
I'm good to keep going.
how are you doing? You good to keep going? All right, let's keep going.
All right, cool. How long does class go till? I forget.
Till 12:45.
Cool.
We usually end a couple minutes early for announcements into someone's class, so
Okay.
around 12:30-ish.
Sounds great. Love it. Okay, I want to go back and talk about the tabernacle a little bit more. How much did you guys go into the tabernacle last week? None?
Not a whole lot.
Okay, cool. Let's talk
I
about
really
it.
didn't want to see a picture of that.
Oh, I'll do better than show you. Does this have, can I do videos on here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Let me show you a very helpful video. So I think these are Jehovah's Witnesses, but they are very helpful because they have actually built the tabernacle, and they have a bunch of really cool videos of them kind of like they don't actually kill any animals or anything that would be weird to see in a video, but they kind of reenact all of these sacrifices, which is super cool. But I'm going to show you first a video of a walkthrough of the tabernacle. Okay, I just need to make it come out of my computer. Or out of the screen. I think I have to do that. You need to get up and stretch or anything while I do this, then go for it.
Justin, give me 10.
Give her 10.
I have to now.
That'd actually be a good brain booster, but I'm not gonna make you do that.
Man,
Was that just like an agreement that you guys had with the new year?
Oh, it's still coming out of, that's a good thing. Hold on.
anytime. These things catch
It's like playing what are the odds.
Oh.
And then say has to.
What did Justin give me 10? 1, 2.
So? 1, 2, 3.
You said 3, 4. Then maybe 2, 1. Do it.
I don't know why it's not working now.
Do it. What it is, you do 5 push-ups right here. 1 and 2 is your arms. So you have to pick one or you
Do 10.
1, 2, 3,
1.
1.
I get to do it.
Yeah.
You check the volume.
Go ahead.
I don't know how to.
Come on. Do it.
I mean, I could play it through my laptop. I don't know if that's true enough.
Next time it's with Justin.
Well,
Yes. I'll do that.
Did you get a little toasty now?
I was
if
kind
I
of
did
making
6,
fun
I
of
probably
you.
did.
I was kind of making in my head earlier, making this like a skirt. But then I see all 3 of us kind of did the same thing.
Well, his is like short. I got like for 6 options.
It is
What?
like,
You got a short skirt. You're showing a lot of skin there.
That's why you like to stay with me in my life.
He's got a sugar.
That is so
You came
weird.
down because you wanted to stay with me.
Maybe I'll just
right next
crank
to
it up
me.
on your end. I think the volume is.
Oh, are you sleeping on the top box?
Well,
Yeah, you came down.
I moved because
That's all right.
the people, they told me to move because the people were coming.
Okay, sorry.
The Hebrew word means dwelling.
We can get it out of that
Where
volume.
God dwelt with his people, and its
Oh my
elements
God,
show us how
that's
to relate
crazy.
with God. After delivering the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, God gave them detailed instructions on how to build this dwelling. Once constructed, the Lord descended on the tabernacle in a pillar of cloud.
Oh wow.
Curtains separated the whole tabernacle from the rest of the Israelite encampment. In this courtyard was the tabernacle's largest piece of furniture, the altar. A wooden box covered with bronze. The altar was shaped as a square, measuring approximately 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. From top to bottom, it stood about 4.5 feet. Hollow space inside the box allowed priests to insert coals. Above was a bronze grating, where priests would lay animals for sacrifice. A horn of one piece with the altar stood at each corner. 4 bronze rings under the ledge allowed one to insert carrying poles so the Israelites could transport the altar. Between the altar and the tent of meeting was a bronze laver. Priests had to cleanse their hands and feet here before offering sacrifices or entering the tent. Within the inner tent stood one of the most recognized elements of the whole tabernacle, the menorah, a lampstand with 3 branches that rose on each side to create a total of 7 lamps. This solid gold lampstand weighed about 75 pounds. Each lamp was a small cup that the priest would fill with oil to fuel the light. Each branch in the middle of the shaft had almond blossoms. The menorah served a most practical purpose. It was the only source of light in the tent, an eternal light that was never to go out. Also in the tent stood a wooden table covered with gold. On it was to always remain the bread of the presence. The bread of the presence symbolizes God's desire to be with his people. Incense was to burn continuously on the altar. God instructed the priests to replenish the incense every evening and morning. A curtain separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. The menorah, the altar of incense, and the bread of the presence were all in the holy place, but outside this veil. Like the curtains covering the tent of meeting, this veil was blue, purple, and scarlet, with cherubim, a kind of angel. Beyond the veil, at the far end of the tabernacle, was the ark. The ark was a wooden box covered with gold. It was nearly 4 feet long. Its width and height were about 2 feet, 3 inches. Like the altar, the ark had rings and poles so the Israelites could carry it as they traveled. Within the ark were the 2 stone tablets on which God had written the 10 Commandments. Later, it contained a sample of manna and the rod that bloomed to reinforce Aaron's leadership. The mercy seat was the ark's lid and features prominently on Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. At each end stood a cherub facing the other with its wings outspread. This cover was made of solid gold. The priest would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on this mercy seat, symbolizing that the nation's sins were covered for another year. While only the high priest would see it, the mercy seat was the key symbol of atonement that God would forgive his people. Though daily sacrifices on the altar were necessary for payment of sin, it was only through the mercy seat on the Day of Atonement that the stain of sin was washed away. While priests had to make repeated sacrifices, one man offered a sacrifice to atone for sin once and for all. When Jesus, the Messiah, died, he sprinkled his own blood before God, securing atonement forever for all who would trust in him. Jesus cleanses us, makes us pure, and enables us to rightly approach the Lord. He tore the veil that kept distance between Israel and the Lord. God dwelt among the Israelites so it did. Now, he dwells with his people through the Spirit.
Wow.
How crazy.
Amen.
Yeah. It makes me tear up. Anyways. How helpful is that video?
It's really helpful.
Yeah. It just brings the whole thing to life. And it makes it feel like so like, I don't know, it feels powerful. Very holy. See, holy is the word. Like, I say powerful and you say holy, like that's good connection. I don't know. I thought that was Anyways. Okay. Question. What do we learn about God? I know we haven't maybe gone into it a lot, but what do you learn about God through this tabernacle? Like, what does it teach us about what he's like and what's important to him? Do you have any ideas?
That he wants to do with his people.
Which, that alone is crazy. Like, just think about that.
Yeah.
Because this is the first time since the garden, right, that he's come and just like dwelled among them.
And that was probably such a crazy thing to them at
Yes.
the time, because their gods didn't relate to them.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Also that he's holy.
Yeah. That is an incredible picture of holiness. Like the way that God, his space is so untouchable almost.
Oh yeah.
Like it is. He has his own room and it is sacred. Like it is like only the high priest goes in there. And when he does go in there, it's once a year. And he goes like with his head down, burning incense so that there's a cloud covering him so he can't see. Like it is so holy and so sacred.
Wow.
Yeah. Anything else?
I see so much of God's protection on the people, because if they do carry sin but get too close in proximity to him, then it would actually harm them.
Yeah.
And so like just the intentionality and love of going like, I am putting in actually like passageways to get from one point to the next, almost creating like an awareness and a consciousness of like, yes, he desires to dwell among them, but he also recognizes the frailty of humanity. Yeah. And he's like, I'm going to put these like, these like pausing places, if you will, so that you can get as close as you can to me, but still stay safe.
Yes, I think I want to show you this kind of overview of it, because I think this shows exactly what you're saying. Like, one thing it makes us think is there's all these parameters around God's presence, like the distance, like the holiness, the sacredness, it's over there, like, you know, it's in the mercy seat, which is in its own room, which even within the holy place, like that's inaccessible for most of Israel. Within the courtyard, which even that's inaccessible for most of Israel, and how just like sacred and like the distance almost from God's presence shows the holiness, but also how there is a path right in. And yes, like they have to go through, like they have to do the sacrifices and they have to be wearing the right things, they have to be cleansed and they have to be clean and ritually pure and all of that stuff, but there is a path in, which is like, this is just such a symbol of it. Like we can visually see what God is doing.
I also love the connection of like in Eden, he put the cherubim at the entrance of the garden. And here with each curtain, like the mercy seat, which obviously is in the Holy of Holies, has the cherubim guarding it. But then you also, the curtains going into each of the places has the cherubim. Yes. And like, just that visual is so powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even just the power of like the symbolism and the visual of all of this, how much even that teaches us, answers a lot of our questions about why is this the way that God does this? Like, why does there have to be all these rituals? Like, why is there all these physical things? But then even what I'm feeling right now, and maybe you guys are feeling is, whoa, this communicates so much. Like, whoa, I get it through these symbols, through these objects, through this diagram. And I think that's why God does a lot of the things that he does, because there's so much power in this imagery. Sorry, I need to go back to my notes on this one. Exodus 25:8 is kind of where this whole tabernacle thing starts. And I just want to sit on that verse for a second. 25:8, it says, "And let them make me a sanctuary." Sanctuary literally means holy place. And tabernacle or tent of meeting literally means dwelling place or residence, which is kind of helpful. So they're kind of all interchangeable. They're making God a holy place and a dwelling place. But he says, "And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst." And I have a question for you. Why? Like, just that whole verse, why?
Why?
Kind of hard to answer, hey.
Well, I mean, he's God, so he's holy, he's perfect. He knows, like, if people are sinful, are broken, like, he can't dwell just among the people. But that's his desire, is he wants to dwell among the people, so he has to have them create a place for him to dwell, like a holy, perfect place for him to dwell, so that he can't dwell.
Why?
Because that's what he's wanted from the beginning.
Why?
Part of his redemption.
That's
Why?
his character.
Why?
That's just who he is.
Why?
Do you have a relation?
Why?
Why?
Because he's relational God.
Yeah, why?
Because he made us in his image.
Why?
Because he wanted to.
Why?
Because he's
God.
Like, I just think that's a crazy path to go on. Like, sometimes I just take things and I just ask why. Okay, then why? Okay, then why? Like, why? And it just brings you to this crazy place. Sometimes it's unanswerable. But sometimes it's like this really cool thing that you discover of like, why? But whenever I do that, I always just come to like awe. Like, at the end of the day, there's no reason for all of this. Everything that God is doing, other than that's what he wants to do.
Wow.
That's what he decided to do. Like, it's so crazy that God is putting all of this in place with them so that he could dwell with them just because he wants to. Yeah.
So I just remember something from my DBS. So have you ever heard about like Jacob when he like Bethel, he sees a stairs, right?
Yes.
So what what one of my teachers said that so wasn't like a stairs up into the heavens like a straight one, was more like a temple, right? It's called he said a ziggurat, right? So I think at the time the people of I think like telling this story, they understood the context, and so I think one of the reasons, and I don't have, I'm not saying that I'm right or anything, it's just like because like to bring the memory of all of everything God did to their ancestors,
Yes.
So this is one of my.
Yes, there is a lot of symbolism, which I'll show you another video that's cool, about the tabernacle and all of this pointing backwards throughout the Bible. So you're definitely onto something. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, so one of the things that the Lord highlighted to me when we were reading this is the first time that with God's direction, he asks man to create something. And so like the fact that, at least from what I was able to see, And so the fact that like man broke access to him and he led them out, like he has done all of these things, but we often, I think humanity in general, fail to see value in the things that we haven't had to put any effort towards.
Ooh, that's very
And so
interesting.
it required like giving up of the things that
Yes.
the Egyptians had given them
Yeah.
that they would see as their own possessions now in order to build this. So even the building of it and the materials for it, their craftsmanship, so their skills and their labor, the carrying of it, like all of these things were, I think, just really this place of like hospitality and hosting and sacrificial like invitation of like, we desire you here.
Wow.
You have made a way every single time.
Yeah.
But like going, I invite you into this place. I'm not going to force myself upon you. I'm going to give you the opportunity to create a space that actually invites me into your midst.
I've never thought about it that way, but I love it.
Wow.
So that's what it makes me think of.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool.
That's actually brought me to the simple fact that Jesus said. So Jesus turned the tables in the temple, right? Because God does not live in the temples anymore. Like, it's such a simple thing. I'm sorry.
No, it's so good.
I love it. Yeah, like what you're saying, the tabernacle is also so valuable. Like literally, like I like was trying to figure out like the numbers, and what I found is that just the gold was worth about $43 million if you converted it to today's time. Just the gold. Like that is so crazy. Like, and it's another image of like how valuable God's presence is, and how worth, like they sacrifice all of these things, which, I mean, the only reason they have gold in the first place is because God gave them favor with the Egyptians to plunder them as they left, which is interesting. But then if you look at the tabernacle, they freely give all of these things, all these contributions to the tabernacle, which is, I mean, a whole other thing, but God providing, then giving them the opportunity to freely give back to him and create, this beautiful presence for him, which is really cool. Yeah, something I think about when I think about this is, Zach and I got to do the coolest honeymoon ever. We got to do 3 months in Europe, and it was just awesome. But yeah, it was awesome. It was so great. God did that. But anyways, that's what YWAM does, is it gets you connections all over the world, so you can stay with people for free. And we got someone hooked us up with this van in Switzerland, and we got to take around for a month and go camping. It was so awesome. I can give you some hacks on that. But anyways. But what this makes me think about is some of the cathedrals that we walked into in Europe. I don't know if you guys have ever been into a cathedral or like, but I felt very weird because on one hand, I was like, wow, this is gorgeous. Like the intricacy, the detail, the value. Like on one sense, I was like, this is so God honoring that they put so much into God's holy place. It's like we've lost some of this. Like now we just have church buildings that are just all pitch black and there's not even any natural light and it's just this like square, I was like, oh, like we've lost this. This is so beautiful. This is so God honoring. And it's like, I felt like, oh, like this felt sacred and holy and like, whoa. But on the other hand, I was like, but this isn't where God is anymore. Like we are the temple now. Right. We are housing God's presence. We walk around with him every day. And then I was like, oh, like these Catholic people are missing so much. Like they just, like there's just such a disconnect between like who we are now in Christ. And I just felt like this tension of like, this is awesome. And also like, this is so sad. Like this is empty. Like this is like idolatry. All of these like statues and all of these saints and stuff. And I was just like torn, feeling both. And I think, that's kind of what this is too. It's like God's holy presence, like, oh, like this is so valuable. Like, I can't believe we get to have him. But then also it's pointing forward. It's pointing to more. Hebrews tells us that tabernacle is the copy or the shadow of the heavenly things. Like, it's just a shadow on earth of what they could have had in the garden. And they don't really know this, but what they're going to have through Jesus. So yeah, it's an amazing thing that they get to have, these Israelites get to have. But like, it's not what they had in the garden. And it's just a tiny shadow of what's coming. So I want to show you another video. This is a Bible Project video. You guys know about Bible Project yet?
Oh, yeah.
Great. We love the Bible Project. But this is kind of the transition into the priesthood. I don't know why it's not even showing any. Let's see. Maybe. Is there a better Wi-Fi for this room?
Are you on main?
I'm on the admin one still.
Oh, main. There's a better Wi-Fi.
It's why main.
Yeah.
The main character.
Did it pull up?
Yes.
Do you want me to type it in?
Maybe that would be great, actually. Get up and stretch if you need to, but we can take a break soon.
Stretch it out.
Huh?
What? Hey, camera girl. You're just sitting down. Oh my gosh.
You want another one?
I'm going to eat you.
They're gone. What did he say? I'm gonna eat you?
What a cool.
You?
So, if you lived in ancient Israel,
Easy.
So, if you lived in ancient Israel, one of the most important places was the tabernacle.
The tabernacle was a sacred tent that the Israelites carried as they journeyed to the promised land.
And it was sacred because it's where the heavenly presence of Israel's God lived on earth. And the tabernacle had an important design to show just how special it was. There's the outer courtyard, then an entry room into the tent, and it leads into the center of the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, God's personal throne room, and it's guarded by these heavenly hybrid creatures called cherubim. Notice, the closer that you get to the center, the more sacred the space becomes.
The people who work in the tabernacle are called priests, and they care for the sacred space, offer sacrifices on behalf of Israel, and announce God's blessing over the people.
Yeah, these priests represent God to the people, and they represent the people to God. So think of both the tabernacle and the priests who work in it like gateways that link together heaven and earth. And this is why the tabernacle was eventually brought up to settle on a mountain, because mountains are where earth meets heaven. Now, one thing that's missing in this tabernacle that you would find in every other ancient holy space are idol images that physically represent the God.
Oh, right. Israel's God explicitly commanded them to not make any idol images.
And that's because in the Bible, all humanity is God's image. This is what we learn in the first pages of the Bible, where Adam and Eve, in Hebrew their names mean human and life, they're called God's image, which means they represent God in his holy space.
And that holy space is a garden in a land called Eden.
Yes, and the story is designed to show that Eden is the reality that the later tabernacle symbolized and pointed back to. For example, look close at the descriptions of Eden. There's the larger region on the land that's called Eden, but then within Eden, God plants a garden. And then in the center of that garden, God plants the tree of life.
The design of Eden matches the tabernacle design.
Yes. And there are details in the Eden story that are developed much later in the Bible, showing how Eden is on a high mountain.
Because they're in a place where earth meets heaven.
Exactly. Wow. And God tells these humans to work and to keep the garden. These are the same words that are used later in the Bible to describe what priests do in the tabernacle.
So Adam and Eve are God's image and are like priests, working and worshiping in a type of heaven on earth temple.
Yes, they represent creation before God, and as God's image, they represent God to all of creation. And they do all of this in this sacred space that's saturated with the life and presence of God. And so God tells them to rule creation on his behalf. They're like priests who embody God's heavenly wisdom and rule here on earth.
We can call them royal priests.
Exactly. Now, this whole setup, the royal priests in God's presence, where there's abundance and life, in the book of Genesis, this is called God's blessing.
But it doesn't last very long.
No. Humanity is deceived by this rebellious creature. They're unsatisfied with being images of God, and so they make a grab at being God, ruling creation on their own terms.
And so God exiles them from the garden.
And God places cherubim at the door of Eden to guard the way back in.
This is tragic. Humanity has given up the role God made them for.
But it's not the end. The rest of the biblical story is about God's mission to undo this tragedy so that humans can regain access to the heaven on earth place where they can finally become God's royal priests. It all begins with a promise that God makes to Adam and Eve that he will raise up one of their descendants to rule over and defeat that deceiver. God says that this coming descendant will strike the head of that deceiver, but also be struck by it.
So this priestly figure will restore God's blessing by offering up his own life like a sacrifice. But this is still just a promise.
Yes, and so in the next story, we find the next generation outside of Eden. Two brothers at the door of the garden are offering sacrifices to God, kind of like priests.
Maybe God will accept these offerings and they can get back into Eden.
But sadly, one brother, Cain, gets angry because God favors his brother Abel's sacrifice. And so Cain murders his own brother. Then Cain is exiled even further from Eden and from God's blessing. And over time, Cain's anger plunges humanity into widespread violence.
Humans really need that coming royal priest to rescue them.
Yes. And that's the hope that this whole story is designed to generate. And so in the next few videos, we're going to explore the theme of this coming royal priest throughout the story of the Bible. We're going to see how the stories of Abraham and Moses and David all point forward to Jesus, who is the ultimate royal priest.
Jesus, the one who will restore the blessings of Eden.
So that all humanity can become the royal priests that we're made to be, ruling the world together on God's behalf.
What do you think about that one?
Whoa. That's great.
That's cool, huh? So yeah, symbolism of the tabernacle is
What's the
never
name of that
ending.
video?
That one is called The Royal Priests of Eden. Yeah, and there's a whole series on it, which I don't think I've actually watched all of them, but they're cool. Let's see. This is the one. Okay, yeah, real quick, and then I'll give you guys a break. But this is like the bird's eye view, which I talked about. So it faces east, which is, I don't know if you've talked about that, but everything, there's this whole theme throughout Genesis and throughout the Bible of evil going out of God's presence and going east, being exiled east. They're always exiled away from God east. And when they come back to God, they come west. Like the garden, it says they go out east. When Abraham traveled, or when Cain is exiled, he goes east. When everyone is doing evil, they're going east. But then Abraham journeys back west and comes into the west. And it's just this theme throughout the whole Bible.
I thought it was the other way around.
I thought it was the other way around. But no, she's right.
Oh, okay.
Just the way that it's set up.
Oh, yeah. That is crazy.
Yeah,
The direction of travel is what I had backwards.
Oh, okay.
I think.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Like the Garden of Eden was in the east, or was it the east of Eden is where, what was that?
Well, when they go east of Eden, Eden is west.
Yeah.
Right?
That's why the two rivers the two rivers and the tree of life are not there anymore. So because it's a tiger and a tiger
The Tigris
and
and the Euphrates.
Euphrates. So those two are still there, right? Tiger and Euphrates.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
I love the connections you're making back there. It's fun. So we've got in the most holy place, we've got the Ark of the Covenant, and on top is the mercy seat. So that's like God's presence and some of the most sacred things. But only the priest goes in once a year. Do you guys know when? Day of Atonement. Yes. And then the altar of incense, they burn incense continually, but like I said, the priest brings the incense in kind of as a covering or a cloud. And then there's these they talked about in the videos, these symbolic table of showbread and the lampstand. And then out here is where the sacrifices happen. So this is the altar where all the burnt offerings are sent up to God. Then there's a basin for cleansing. And you can kind of see how there's like a path in. So the people of Israel don't go in here. The priests go in here. Only the high priests go in here. So kind of like there's this increase of holiness as you go in. Yeah.
What's the significance of the showbread again?
That's something I've heard. There's different. I'm not 100% sure. The video just said it's represents the people of Israel. Let's see what it says in Exodus. Table for bread, Exodus 25. You shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me regularly. Okay. Let me look into that again, because that's something that I'm also kind of confused about.
Because that later would symbolize as Jesus
Mhm.
in the life.
Yep. And then the camp is arranged around the tabernacle.
It's a center.
Yes. So they all dwell literally around God's presence, which is really cool. And we see that in Numbers. God gives them very specific instructions on how they're supposed to set up their camp around the tabernacle. So that's kind of zoomed out, you know.
You know what the word tabernacle means?
Yeah, dwelling.
Just means dwelling.
Yeah, interesting. In John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, this is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
John chapter 1. Where's the verse? Okay, 1 verse 14. And the Word, which is Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt is literally tabernacle.
No way.
Yeah, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Yeah, really cool. John knew what he was doing there. Anyways, should we take a break? All right, let's talk about priesthood. Do you guys remember how the priesthood was appointed? Where it came from? How they started? Yes? Aaron? Levites? When? What happened? How did it happen?
After that,
The Exodus.
going down,
Yes.
so Moses says, like, when God says, or Moses says, so he has, like, whoever stands with God, come and everyone go.
Yeah.
And the Levites stand with them and they kill 3,000 people on this side. So that's how they did it.
Yes. Good
Come
job.
on!
Come on, yeah, good.
So that is where the priests come from. And I mean, if you remember, in Exodus, they were supposed to be a kingdom of priests. They were all supposed to be priests. But then the sin happens, and the Levites are set apart to be the priesthood. So it just kind of follows God's theme and strategy of taking a small group, refining them, setting them apart, making them holy to, minister and represent and, work out towards the rest.
It's like before the golden calf, they were all supposed to be.
That's what it seems like. That's what God said. It will be to me a kingdom of priests.
Is it Trinity? Trinity.
So God, he does this. He takes a small group, he sets them apart, and then he uses them missionally to go out, I guess. Not good wording, but you know what I mean. So yeah, the Levites are set apart to be the priesthood, and specifically Aaron's line is the line of priests. So not every Levite is a priest, but they all have their own tasks revolving around the tabernacle. Numbers will really show us how this works. So some of the Levites are taking care of different items in the tabernacle, to have charge of different things. Numbers shows us how they actually transport the tabernacle when they move, because it is a what's the word?
Mobile.
What?
Mobile.
Yeah, mobile. That's the word. It's mobile. So it shows us, okay, these holy things that they're not even supposed to touch, how do they move them? Numbers tells us that. And so the Levites are set apart for all things tabernacle, all things worship, but specifically Aaron's line is the priesthood, and the high priest. So I just found some verses that kind of explains, what are they doing? And I want to actually flip to them because I think they're helpful. So Numbers 3, 5-10 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Bring the tribe of Levi near and set them before Aaron the priest, that they may minister to him." So I think I wrote that later. Yeah, minister is one of the things that they do. "They shall keep guard over him and over the whole congregation before the tent of meeting as they minister at the tabernacle." So they're actually guards. Yeah, so if you keep going from verse 8, yeah, they're guarding the congregation from the presence of God. Interesting. And then verse 8, "They shall guard all the furnishing of the tent of meeting, and they shall keep guard over the people of Israel as they minister at the tabernacle. And you shall give the Levites to Aaron and his sons. They are wholly given to him from among the people of Israel. And you shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall guard their priesthood. But if any outsider comes near, he shall be put to death." Okay? So they're guards. So we kind of touched on it, and I'll really unpack it in Leviticus tomorrow. But something about God's holiness is that it's dangerous to those that are unholy. If you are tainted by sin, God's presence and his extreme holiness becomes dangerous to you. And not only that, but they don't want God's holy things to be defiled. Because if they are, that kind of ruins them, and they have to be consecrated, because their whole point is that they are pure things, that his space is sacred. So the Levites kind of act as, not only are they guarding God's sacred space from being tainted, but they are guarding people from the danger of these holy things in God's holy presence. So they're kind of, in the middle. And I want to see what Leviticus 15 says.
Is Leviticus called Leviticus because it talks about the Levites?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is why.
Oh, wow. Great class.
Leviticus 15:31 says, "Thus you shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst." So this sin and holiness combo is dangerous. It brings death. And so the Levites have a very special job, very important job as guards, which you don't really think about the priests being guards, but that's one of the things that they are. They're ministering, so they're taking care of, and they are doing God's work. They are teaching and distinguishing. Leviticus 10:10 kind of tells us that. 10:10, it says, "You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean. And you are to teach the people of Israel all the statute that the Lord has spoken to them by Moses." So they are in charge of teaching Israel God's statutes and distinguishing what is clean, what is unclean, kind of keeping that separation, and kind of guiding the people into God's presence that way. They are meant to judge. Deuteronomy 18. (8 to 10) says, 17, 8 to 10 If any case arises requiring decision between one kind of homicide and another, one kind of legal right and another, or one kind of assault and another, any case within your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place that the Lord your God will choose, or go to the place of worship. And you shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. So basically, they ask as judges as well, because they're supposed to be the ones really, really getting to know the law and all of these cleanliness, holiness practices. So they are trusted to judge. And then something that's almost kind of random is they diagnose leprosy, which leprosy in Leviticus isn't actually leprosy. It's like skin diseases in general or specific kind that we don't know for sure what it is. But leprosy is actually very misleading. We'll talk about that later. But did you guys read that bit where it talks about how the priests, diagnose these skin diseases and tell them, does your translation say leprosy or no?
Skin disease.
Nice. Okay, that's helpful.
Skin disease.
Yeah, so the priests actually diagnose all of these skin diseases, which is kind of an interesting role for them to have, which we'll talk about a bit more. And then there's the high priest. So the role of the high priest is to oversee everything going on in the tabernacle. They're kind of in charge. I mean, they are in charge. They help determine the will of God. So if you've seen this weird thing, the Urim and the Thummim, those are, we don't know exactly how they function, but it was some pieces that they held in their robe that helped them determine the will of God. Like maybe kind of like dice or something like that. So they were to be consulted about the will of God, and they facilitate the Day of Atonement, which is very special, very holy day. Again, which we'll get into tomorrow when we get into Leviticus. But only the high priest was capable of facilitating the Day of Atonement because they are supposed to be the most holy out of anyone in Israel. They're the only ones that had access into the holiest place. So the high priest was actually one of the most important leaders of all of Israel. They have a very important job. And even as you see Aaron representing the first high priest, which is interesting in itself that after Aaron screwed up so badly, he still gets to be the high priest. But you see how big of a role Aaron has in leadership in Israel as these stories go on. Not just, all things related to the tabernacle, but he's actually a main leader of Israel. Make sense? I'm kind of I don't know if I told you this even, but what I'm doing today is kind of setting the foundation for things you need to know as we go through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So you need to know how the priests function, the purpose of the tabernacle in order for anything that's coming next to make sense. Cool? Good to go on? Yes. Awesome. Another important thing you need to know about is Canaan, aka the Promised Land, aka the land of milk and honey, which I think is such a great. I know, I love that picture. That's a good one. So, what is the significance of the Promised Land? We talked about it a bit, but why is it so important? Why is it such a big deal? They are supposed to be separate from all the nations and set apart and holy in so many different ways. And a land, honestly, really practical, helps them do that. If they don't have their own space to live and to, execute God's law in, then, how is anyone else going to see that? Or how are they going to interact with the other nations? How are they really going to set themselves up God's way? So I think there's a really practical aspect, as well as God giving them such a beautiful thing that they desire. Like them being in Egypt, because they didn't have their own land, they couldn't have their own laws. They couldn't have their own worship. They couldn't have their own sacrifice. They were submitting to the other nation. But then they go into the wilderness, and that's not right either, because now they're not even around the other nations. And they are, they don't really have food. They don't have the way to, they're not having fun, first of all, at all. And it's not right for them. It's not, God takes care of them, but that's not their ending place. That's not where they're going to thrive, in the wilderness. But when they have their own land, not only is it a gift, but it's also a way for them to set up into the nation that's following after God. So yes, but the promised land, there are other people in it. The Canaanites are dwelling in this land. And so that's going to be a big problem. It comes up in the Pentateuch. They're referred to as 7 nations. The Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites. You guys seen that? The Amorites.
Yeah.
There are 7 nations that are living in this land of Canaan. And they are evil. They don't follow God's ways. They are idolatrous. They sacrifice their children, their babies, to gods. They're doing all of these horrible things. And God tells Israel to kill them all. Everything. Get rid of everything. Not even like their items should you take for yourself. Like, get rid of it all. Purge the land. And that's strategic in the way that we know Israel gets tempted by the other nations. If they are truly going to be a nation set apart for God, being missional to the other nations around them, they can't be corrupted by these things. And so God wants to clear the land so they can have their own place to do their own things. So he tells them all. He tells them to kill them all. But, like we've already seen with the Egyptians, God has mercy. There is a way for these Canaanites to come in as well, which is crazy. You'll see some stories about that in Joshua. Very, very cool. But again, they have to make a choice. You will learn a lot about the Canaanite religion studying the Pentateuch because, one, God tries to prevent them from not being like them. Like, even in the law, we learn so much about Canaanite religion because God tells them so many things not to do because they do it. Don't do it because they do it. But second, you will learn a lot about Canaanite religion because Israel does end up falling to Canaanite religion multiple times, which sucks. The plan doesn't go perfectly. Spoiler, they don't purge all of the nations, and it is a problem continually. So God's plan was a good plan, but didn't fully get executed all the way. So let's learn about this nation a bit for the rest of class, for these nations. So, overall, the gods of Canaan were powerful, and this is how they were seen. They were powerful and in control. They were revealed in images or idols, and they actually required food, housing, clothing, and worship. I don't really know how that works, but they had to be fed somehow by the people. There are some offerings in Leviticus that it says, they share with God. But what's different here is that it's kind of like they're providing for these gods, which our God does not need that. But they still give and they share in fellowship with God. So there's ways that there's like similarities, but God is so different than all these other gods. Yeah, that's very interesting. But the people are weak and helpless. They need protection, provision, and order. So, but they are separate. The gods and the people are separate. They don't just interact for fun. They're different people. They have their own places. They're separate. What the people do for the gods is they give service and loyalty. And the gods give blessings and favor. So they're very transactional relationship. You give me this, I will give you this. The gods did not communicate, this is what I talked about before, they did not communicate what satisfied them or made them angry. They communicated through result only, punishment and reward. So they would never know what would make the god happy or angry that day. They would just guess and see what happened. Human order and justice only mattered to the gods because humans required them to function. So the only time that God would even think about interacting with human systems is because the humans need it to function, and they need the humans to provide for them and to serve them. That's the only reason that any of how they lived mattered. Does that make sense? So they could receive from them. And their relationship was based on transactions and needs, not care or relationship. So very transactional, very separate. Okay? But then there's Yahweh. Powerful and in control as well, obviously. Ultimately, powerful and in control. Humans are his images. God does not have his own image.
So good.
Which sets him apart incredibly, and he doesn't need anything from his people. He does not rely on anything except for himself. And the people are still weak and helpless, need protection, provision, and order. That's who we are. But their interactions were genuine relationship. God genuinely, like we just talked about with the tabernacle, like why? Why? Relationship, because he wants to be with them. He's choosing. He doesn't need anything from the people. He's choosing interaction with them. So the people worship and obey God, not, out of response for all of this. And then Yahweh gives life. So it's not the same like transactional, if you do this, I'll do this. Relationship is a part of it no matter what. That's a given. God has chosen to be with his people, to dwell with them, and he will make a way. But he asks his people to worship and obey him. And then he is the provider of life.
When they worship and obey. Only when they worship, like he gives life when they worship and obey? At the response?
No, God gives life first.
Okay, so you're saying those are separate.
Yes,
okay,
sorry. They're like the same wording, but
yeah.
I'm trying to explain how they're different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then so God makes what he requires super clear, like we talked about. They're not guessing with God. He communicates in ways they understand. He actually speaks to them. Human order and justice matter because they reflect God. And relationship based off of love and promises, not what they can give to God. You guys have any questions about this so far? You guys kind of see the transactional provision relationship versus the relationship. And then a few relevant random things that you might have already seen or will see is that they use animal livers to predict the future. Okay. Rain was seen as one of the gods' semen. And menstrual blood plus rain equals the birth of crops. So, sorry. Surprise, there's that. Everything was born, not created, so mixing things, they were making new birth. And shaving the edges of beards and self-mutilation were mourning practices of the pagan priests. Like I said, if something doesn't make sense, there's a good chance it relates to pagan practices. So that's why these things are relevant.
Jewish don't shave it.
And then question?
Why animal liver?
I don't know actually how that really worked or why that was what they did, but there's something about how it was arranged was some kind of divination. I don't fully understand how that worked. But yeah. So sometimes if there's weird, like how it says, well, as we see them in Leviticus, we'll talk about it. This is kind of just like, pay attention to these things. That's kind of one of the stuff that they did to worship.
I didn't understand, but menstrual blood plus rain.
Yeah, so because the rain was Baal's semen, they would put their menstrual blood on the crops so that when they mixed, they were fertilizing.
So it's like the women's menstrual blood, not like the goddesses kind of.
And they talk about a man having sex with a woman who's on her period.
Yeah.
Wow.
So God wants these things
that's interesting.
Nowhere near worship of him. Yeah. Because he is not worshipped like that. They're not creating life like that. That's not how it works with God. but it's how it works with them. And so God says, here's some parameters around those things. That makes sense?
It's like the ladies, when they used to get in their period, they used to go away. And I was just telling them that's why the Jewish they don't shave the edges of their beards.
Oh.
Yep.
But,
Yep. God doesn't just give them laws for no reason. Even if we don't fully understand the reason, or it's, it's there. We just gotta dig for it. You guys ready to move over there? Yeah, no worries. And then I just have one more slide and then we're gonna wrap up for today.
Can you explain the last one?
Yeah, so God tells them not to shave the edges of their beard.
Edges? Like...
Yeah. And that's because the priests would do that in mourning. And I don't know fully what that looked like, but it was related to pagan worship somehow. And so God says, that's not how you guys mourn. We don't do that.
Just the beard. So they do it.
Yeah.
So they pay. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. We can unpack these more when they see them. I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a thought. And these were the most common gods that we see in the Bible. So Baal is the most powerful god. He is the god of the sun, rain, thunder, and fertility. So he was in charge of producing crops and children. Worship included ritual prostitution, sacrifice of firstborn children, ecstatic cries, and self-harm. So all of these gods are very evil. And you can understand as we go through these why God wants to separate himself from them. You do not worship me like you would worship them. Dagon is a god of crop fertility. Sorry, that was hard to say. Revealed as half man, half fish. El is the chief deity, the father and ruler of gods and men, and he's the god of the sky. Astarte, or Ashtra, the goddess of fertility, sexuality, and war, revealed through a carved wooden pole. Worship included sensuality, ritual prostitution, divination, and foretelling. And then Molech is, I hate all of them, but he's revealed as a giant metal statue with a bull's head, a hole in the chest, with fire inside, and outstretched arms, like that picture. He is worshipped by ritual prostitution, orgies, sacrifice of the firstborn children. So the babies were actually placed on his burning arms to fall down into the fire inside. It's horrible. He was supposed to provide financial prosperity. So you see that God also takes the firstborn children, but in such a different way. God says over and over, like, do not sacrifice your babies. Do not do that. Yeah, don't do that. God is not the God of death and sexual worship and, I don't know, all of this evil stuff. But still, somehow, the Israelites are tempted. They see this worship and they're like, ooh, that sounds great. Let's try it. And it goes horribly, horribly wrong every time. Something interesting about Egypt versus Canaan is Egypt, their gods, they were focused so much on the afterlife. Whereas Canaan is kind of more based around survival. So you see like all of these, they're for the crops, or they're for financial prosperity, or they're for, helping them to survive in the land. And that's partly because Egypt has the Nile, which the Nile has very regular rhythms of rising and falling. So they actually are very fertile land. They can rely on the river to bring them crops and animals and everything. Basically, they're not really worried about survival. So they start to think about the afterlife. Oh, like what's next? Let's prepare for what's next. But the land of Canaan, even though it's a very fertile land, they're really focused on, their crops. And are we going to get the rain for the crops? And am I going to be able to have a baby? And all of this kind of stuff. And so their worship is a lot more focused on, their immediate needs, which is kind of an interesting comparison. But yeah, so God has stopped them in between Egypt and Canaan to show them how not to be like either of them. That's the goal. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? Yeah, so you'll see these names come up a lot, and so you can kind of put a bit of background to them now when you see them. Yeah, so to finish up, would anyone like to tell me something new that they learned today? Oh, so much.
What happened?
Sure.
Maybe something that was either the most surprising or that you think is the most relevant to your life or what you're learning about God right now.
I think it's just why they were thinking I'll share. I think it's more just like viewing as we read through the Pentateuch, like the lenses that you set up for us. So like Israel's asking like, who are they? Who is God? What is their relationship with him? Is it like worth the devotion for their lives? Or is it like out of being, or is he like worthy to be king even? Sorry, I like shorthand said, I think. Yeah. I think it's just like really helpful. So like view it that way as I read it through again.
Awesome. I'm glad you think that's helpful because it is.
Yeah.
I think that, like, in the beginning when we were talking about the wilderness and, like, him keeping them in that little area and, like, drawing them to himself and, like, having, like, establishing a dwelling place. And I think, like, seeing all of, like, that stuff that came with it of, like, he wants to take them away from all the other nations so they're not going to get corrupted. And I think just that whole, like, seeing the visual aspect of what God was actually doing, I think, to me, that I think just spoke a lot or like encouraged me in God's character, and really like puts a lot of energy to like my wilderness seasons. That it's like, because sometimes I think I can look at the wilderness and be like, oh, like you're punishing me, like you punished the Israelites, but really like changing the perspective to like, okay, God, like if I'm going through a wilderness, then it's because you're wanting to establish more like concrete ways that like I can dwell with you or like you can dwell with me. And like it's really a beautiful thing that you're drawing me out to yourself and not just letting me wander and like feel like, because I think that sometimes in my faith, like I have promised land moments where it's like everything feels like nourished and fertile and like alive, and then I go through other seasons where it's like, oh, everything just feels dry and like I feel like I'm eating the same thing over and over. So to see that the dryness isn't him punishing me, but really it's like it's all beautiful, whether it's like super fertile in this promise or a drier season, all of it is being used and nothing wasted.
Ooh, that's so good.
So that was good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Amen.
Yeah, amen.
I think for me, the way you the connection between like showed the resemblance between the kind of freedom and the
Yeah, that's interesting,
that
huh?
was really so cool.
Yeah.
Like because I never thought of that in that way. I used to think why about tabernacle like by God. So but when you like wait for me that it's something it's like oh yeah that makes more sense and like wow.
It shows that that's God's plan is to bring them back.
Yeah.
Yes. And like coming same as like when you said like God was used to be with them in the Garden of Eden and he again came there and was like dwelling with them. So I was like wow that was okay.
So
That's me too. That was
And
the biggest.
also
nice.
and with the pagan beliefs like he told the pagan beliefs it's like what? They're like so, ridiculous. They're like really, really ridiculous beliefs. And the connections, like he said, like with the shaving and also like the blood and the rain. And then we read Leviticus and stuff like the discharge, bodily discharge, and 8 or 9 chapter, something, so we can see why God is saying those things.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, no law is random. Yeah.
Yep.
That's so true. So
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. Dang, okay, well, I had fun with you guys. Let me just pray and I'll get out. Okay. Lord, thank you so much for class today. Thank you just for connecting so many dots, and bringing to life so many of these truths and these concepts and these systems that you put in place. Thank you that the Old Testament is not dead and irrelevant, but that it's so beautiful and that it teaches us so much. And I just pray over their readings today and studyings today, Lord, that you will just be with them, that you will provide your Holy Spirit, teach them the things of you, and that you will bring them energy and fun and just more depth of you, and that they will end their day just worshiping you for all of the new ways that they see you. So I'm so thankful, and we really love you. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to the YWAM Nashville podcast. If you want to get more information about our community, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, and TikTok at YWAM Nashville. To get connected, visit our website at ywamnashville.org or email us at info@ywamnashville. Blessings.